We will go live now. So namaste, good evening and good morning to all Zoom and YouTube webinar participants. A warm welcome to this IPA APS Joint webinar towards gender equity, new directions and steps. I'm Vandana Nanal, General Secretary of Indian Physics Association, IPA, and Professor at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. This program has two parts, the panel discussion today and two lectures by eminent women scientists tomorrow. Zoom link is same for both the sessions and YouTube links are available on IPA webpage. I'll also post the links in the chat. We look forward to your active participation. Do send your feedback and suggestions either via chat or the email and email addresses I will put in the chat box. Before we go further, I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Amy Flatton, APS Director of International Affairs, and Professor Spentra Vadia, former Center Director, ICTS-TIFR, and member International Affairs Committee of APS for their support in making this program happen. I now invite Professor Shubhavati Goswami to say a few words about IPA and its Jetta Group. Professor Shubhavati is a senior professor at Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad. She specializes in neutrino physics and is a fellow of all Science Academies of India. She is also a fellow of Third World Academy of Sciences. Over to you, Shubhavati. Shubhavati, you are muted.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just share my screen and the slides. Is it visible?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Vandana, and a warm welcome to all of you. I will just introduce very briefly the Indian Physics Association and its gender wing, the Gender in Physics Working Group. So the Indian Physics Association was established in all over India and with more than 4,000 members. The main goal of IPA is to help the advancement, dissemination, and application of the knowledge of physics. And it does it through various ways like publication of bulletins, newsletters, informing new developments, arranging seminars, special programs, lectures for students, teachers, and young researchers, partnership with conferences, liaisons with Physics Association of other countries, monitoring awards and endowment lectures, etc. This is the web page of IPA. And these are the present office bearers. Professor S. Ramakrishnan is the president from TIFR. Professor Tanushri Shah-Dashgupta is the vice president. And as I said, it was established in 1970. So in 2020, we had 50 years of IPA. And that was celebrated through a webinar series. Because of the pandemic, it became an online lecture series. And many lectures were organized during the period of September 2020 to March 2021. The links are available on IPA webpage. One of the events was a IPA Women in Physics panel discussion that was held. And IPA also has its publication, the news bulletin is Physics News. And one important issue was in 2017, this issue, all the women, the articles were all for women physicists. And then in this year, we had a special issue on Dr. Bibha Chowdhury, who is the first women high energy physicists of India. The Gender in Physics Working Group was formed in 2017, and the brief history of the efforts which led to the genesis of the group, can be found in this link. And it organized two major events. One is Pressing for Progress 2018, a discussion meeting on the gender gap in physics. And in 2019, we organized a national level conference to gender disparity in physics. So this is the first such conference which was held in India. And the deliberations led to Hyderabad's charter, which is a guiding document for gender equity. We are continuing with the work that we started. And with this, I will just come to the end of my introduction. And I think that, the brainstorming session and the panel discussions will lead us to learn about each other's best practices, and it will be surely be a pointer to the way forward, because as we know that this gender disparity problem does not get corrected with time. So we need to have discourses and disseminations and see how we can improve this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubhavati.
Thank you, Shubhavati.
Now I invite
I have to stop share.
Yeah, you can stop share. Yeah. Professor Rennie Michel is a professor at University of Maryland, College Park. She is Assistant Director of Programs at APS. Her work is focused on physics education with special interest in women in physics. I now invite her to say a few words about APS and APS programs. Over to you, Rennie.
Thank you so much. As Vandana said, I am Renee Michelle Gertzen. I am the Assistant Director of Programs at the American Physical Society, and I use she, her pronouns. I am no longer at the University of Maryland. I'd like to thank everyone at the Indian Physics Association who organized this and the opportunity for APS to collaborate. APS values events like this because we want to engage with the global physics community. Our membership reflects the international nature of physics. Nearly 1/4 of APS members live outside of the US. And with virtual meetings, even more physicists across the globe, such as participants in this webinar, can engage with APS and participate in our meetings. More than 2/3 of the articles published in APS journals are from authors outside of the US. And as physicists often belong to their own national or regional physics society and also to APS, the society has the opportunity to serve as a welcoming global hub for all physicists. We don't presume to be the world's physical society, but instead to offer a place for the world's physicists to connect with each other and advance our shared interests. And part of these interests is making sure that opportunities are available for all physicists, regardless of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, and any other areas. APS provides support for women and gender minorities worldwide in several ways. We provide resources and statistics to advocate for change. For undergraduates, we run a virtual conference for undergraduate women in physics, where students learn about careers, professional development, and research. I hope you will encourage students that you know to register now. Registration is open. And lastly, we support activities like this. And of course, it wouldn't be possible without your participation. So thank you all for being part of this conversation today.
Thank you, Rennie. That was really very succinct and but full of information. So thank you very much. And now I invite Professor Shubhavati to introduce the panel coordinators for today's panel discussion.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nishita Desai and Dr. Jyoti Katoch. Nishita Desai is a Ramanujan Fellow at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. She completed her PhD from the Harishchandra Research Institute in Allahabad in 2013 in elementary particle physics. Following this, she worked as a research associate at University College London, Heidelberg University, where she was a Humboldt Fellow, and University of Montpellier. Her work consists of proposing new fundamental physics theories and giving predictive computational models based on them so that they can be tested at the Large Hadron Collider experiment in Geneva. Dr. Jyoti Katoch is an assistant professor of physics at Carnegie Mellon University. She is an experimental condensed matter physicist who studies the electronic properties of a of two-dimensional materials. Her research lab employs a wide range of experimental techniques, including atomically precise assembly of van der Waals material heterostructures, nano-device fabrication, epitaxial thin film growth, in operando angle resolved photoemission spectroscopy with focused spot size on devices, and magnetotransport measurements. She is a recent recipient of the US Department of Energy Early Career Award and Ralph E. Pao Junior Faculty Enhancement Award. She has served as the chair of the conference organizing committee for APS Conference for undergraduate women in physics, held at the Ohio University in 2016 and at CMU at Carnegie Mellon in 2020. So with this, the floor is now open for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Bhavati, and welcome everybody. So just to start, what we have planned today is about an hour and 45 minutes for what will hopefully be a very lively discussion on current issues. Jyoti and I will be your hosts for the evening, and we have 4 panelists who are experts in the topics that we wish to address. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We might not be able to get to them right away, but we have a dedicated time for answering all your questions. Okay. So to start, what I would like to highlight are just a few statistics that were collected by the Gender in Physics Working Group, and an earlier incarnation in the form of a paper published in 2010 by Kurup et al. These statistics refer to the situation in India right now. So Gender in Physics Working Group has found that for PhD students currently in India, it seems that 45% of students enrolling are currently women. So we are very close to the 50% mark. The number remains at 41% for the postdoctoral stage, but falls to 16% at faculty stage. So this is one of the well-known questions of attrition, which has been dubbed the leaky pipeline. Another possibly problematic statistic is that number of women awardees for the highest science award in India, which is the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, is less than 1%. And the number of elected fellows for scholarly academies is less than 5%. Some more interesting statistics from the 2010 study that I mentioned, which had about 2,000 women who had a PhD. And this study focused mainly also on women who are no longer in the workforce. So they provide a very interesting counter view, not only of people who are currently working, but people who had to leave, and asking for reasons of why they had to leave. So another thing to mention is this study also had a control sample of about 400 men. So that gives you a useful comparison. And the reasons for people who are currently not working in academia anymore, in the women's category, the answer was about 50% for family reasons, 90% for lack of organizational support, and less than 10% for pursuing better opportunities, better finances in industry. Whereas for men, a whopping 46% was for pursuing better opportunities. And overall, about 13% of women with PhDs did not have current jobs. So they were currently unemployed. And the number for men was correspondingly less than 1%. So it seems that a very large fraction of trained women scientists is no longer being retained in the workforce. Of course, this is a slightly older study from 2010, and the time is right to repeat such a study, but still it also gives us another entryway into asking the questions of what needs to be done. Okay. So this was just to set the stage with some hard statistics, and we'll begin our panel discussion by introducing the panelists. So Jyoti, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nishita. And greetings everyone from Pittsburgh. We have 4 panelists, so I'll begin alphabetically. I'll just introduce first to Nishita, you can then take over. So the first panelist we have is Ramon Bethame. He's a former Fulbright US Department of Education, AAS Science Policy Fellow and Private sector consultant dedicated to equity and inclusion in physics and astronomy. Currently, he is an assistant professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Utah and has secured over $1 million in external funding. His work has included studying the experiences of women in graduate school and astronomy, LGBT persistence in the field of physics, and the motivation of students to pursue physics in Finland. He was also this recent recipient of the American Association of Physics Teachers Early Career Award and a Fulbright Finland Alumni Award. He holds a bachelor's degree in astronomy from Michigan State University and a PhD in physics education research from Western Michigan University. Ramon, you want to say, do you want to add something before I go on to the next speaker, next panelist?
Is this the point where you want us to give a 5-minute talk, or are we just introducing ourselves?
Yes. Yeah.
So thanks so much for having me. I'm really appreciative of being here. And my work has really centered on issues of gender and also the LGBT community in the field of physics. And one of the big studies that I've done is a longitudinal study looking at the in-depth qualitative experiences of graduate women in physics and astronomy. I did the initial interviews in 2012 when I was a graduate student, and I'm doing follow-up interviews now 10 years later to see, with the exact same people, to see what the trajectories of their careers were and understand the challenges and barriers that they faced in pursuit of their educations, but also now their professional careers. My work has revealed a number of issues that have come up, which have ranged from gendered microaggressions and harassment all the way down to more work-life balance type issues, and also the challenges of an academic community that is training and pushing folks towards an academic tenure track career, when in fact a lot of people actually see other careers being equally viable and important options for them and the lives that they want to live. Additionally, the work that I have done has really pushed physics education researchers and other STEM ed researchers to think beyond binaries and to think beyond gaps. It's important to remember that the challenges don't lie with us as the people. The challenges lie with the institutions that limit our ability to be full members of the community and succeed in the ways that we see as being important. So a big push of my work is thinking about how we can look at people's individual lives from their perspectives and not compare them to their majority peers, because all things aren't equal when we make those comparisons. The last thing that I'll quickly say is gender and identity in general are incredibly complicated, and we aren't just these one-dimensional people. We have other aspects of our lives, right? We come from different opportunities, right? We come from different families that have different levels of education. We come from different socioeconomic statuses, different classes, different sexual orientations. And it's important to remember that we are complicated people, and the challenges that we face aren't just due to our gender or our sexual orientation or a race or a class, but are a combination of these things. So it's critical that we keep this in mind and think more holistically about us as people when we do this research and work. So thank you so much for the kind introduction.
Thank you, Ramon. So moving on to our next panelist, we have Suchit Na Chatterjee. She's a faculty member of the Department of Physics at Presidency University. Her research area lies in the interface of astrophysics and cosmology and combines theoretical, phenomenological, and data-oriented aspects. The core of her research is focused in investigating the connection between supermassive black hole evolution and cosmological structure formation in numerical simulations and testing the predictions against multi-wavelength observations. She has been awarded multiple grants, including the CERB Early Career Grant Award, research grant. As an academic, she is very excited about physics teaching, physics education research, as well as public outreach of science. She is a recipient of the Indian Association of Physics Teachers, Dinabandhu Sahu Memorial Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching and Mentoring, and is one of the National Astronomy Education Coordinators of the International Astronomical Union. She served the IPA Gender Working Group and has led efforts in enhancing diversity in physics and beyond. Suchit Na.
So thank you very much, Jyoti, for the very kind introduction. Now, so since you're speaking from Pittsburgh, I have to say that that gives me fond memories, because I did my PhD from University of Pittsburgh and was almost a weekly frequent visitor to the Carnegie Mellon campus because I worked with people there. So that's great
Nice.
to see that. Hear that.
Yeah,
see you
we
that
have
you're
some
speaking.
connection, special
Yes,
connection.
yes,
Yes, I got
great.
it.
Yeah. So I guess so I don't have any. I first must say that I don't have any expertise on gender studies or this issue. How we can academically look at it and stuff like that. All my experiences has been through mostly personal experiences that I have achieved through my interactions with people and the day-to-day things that I faced in the physics community or have seen my colleagues facing or have been. So it's not that. So I don't think I'm anyway close to an expert or even in the context of understanding gender. I just want to maybe can I slide a couple of slides to sort of see how tell that how I kind of see the issue of equity and the gender issue in physics and beyond. Is it possible that I can share a couple of slides?
Yeah, please.
Of course.
Please do.
Thank you. So just one sec. So let's see. I'll just stop my video. Can you folks see the slides?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So I think I was looking up, this is what I like to say, that I was looking up, I don't know why the slideshow is not starting, but let's see. So I was trying to, I was looking up the meaning, there's some issue with the display. So I was just looking at the meaning of equity in the Merriam Dictionary today. And what it says is that fairness or justice in the way people are treated. Now, of course, as we understand that equity, because the title is Towards Gender Equity, New Directions and Steps, we'll be talking about that in the next 1.5 hours, maybe. And gender, as Raman also said, is also not a binary concept. It's actually a very complex concept. So it's a big thing in sociology research, and it's very difficult to have. But so what exactly we mean by gender is a complex thing and has lots of attributes to it. So what I would stick for my discussions in this panel is we will have this. Gender, as we probably roughly understand biologically, that men and women, and the issue that why we are talking about equity at all and why that matters is because roughly 50% of the world are men, 50% of the world's population are men and 50% are women. So it's half the world population are men and half are women. Yet, if we see that in terms of social, financial, cultural, intellectual attributes, so it's just not physics, it's in the society, we do see that there's a lot of disparity in access to resources or prestige or whatever. And that's where socially, I guess the gender equity is such a big issue all over the world. And my particular subject, physical sciences, physics or astronomy, there it has other dimensions that I'm sure we will have some discussions in the panels. So rather, I would think that it's such a complex and deep problem. And the reason I would champion equity is I just want to enhance its meaning a little bit more and call it diversity. And as I think Raman said, that diversity, for example, from the physical science point of view, where I belong, or from the technology science, intellectual development point of view, that we want to champion diversity because we want to bring multitude of talents from different spheres of life, from different spheres of society, because the society is getting more and more complex, our problems are getting more and more complex, and we want to have a world to deal with more complex problems. So I'll talk about it more if we get the chance, but although equity and diversity are definitely not the same thing, But to me, somehow, whenever I think about equity or even gender equity, the diversity aspect, that why we need a diverse representation in any field in society, not just physics, but everywhere in society, we need diverse representation, and why that is so important for the betterment of ourselves and our society. So I would see the problem that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suchitna. So we have two more panelists today. The next panelist is Professor Galvan Menon, who is a professor of physics and biology at Ashoka University, Sonipat, and at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai. He is the current director of the Center of Climate Change and Sustainability at Ashoka University. His research covers a range of areas in statistical physics, biophysics, disease modeling, and public policy. He is interested in making science accessible to the public and has worked and written extensively on COVID-19 pandemic in India. He was awarded the Swarna Jayanti Fellowship of the Department of Science and Technology of India and was named an outstanding referee of the American Physical Society. He is also the elected fellow of National Academy of Sciences in India. Gautam, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah. Thank you, Nishita. I hope you can hear me. So I'm not an expert in gender issues, although what I can say is I've been working in a small to medium-sized private university for the past 2 years, and before that for about 20 years in a publicly funded research institution. So I do know how the landscape of academia and hiring and what goes on in both public and private spheres to some extent. And that's really some minor justification for my being here. Obviously, large-scale societal transformation that values the work of women equally with that of men, recognizes the issues that women face but men don't, and eliminates the sort of casual everyday sexism that women encounter on a regular basis. Obviously, one has to get rid of this, but we can't wait for it. And it's the role of professional organizations such as the IPA, the APS, etc., our communities, to try and see what change they can affect and to what extent we can be examples to other communities in other areas. Biology, for example, is a community where the ratio of women to men is somewhat better than that of physics. So what is it that they're doing? What is it they have managed to do so far? We should take lessons from other communities at work and hold ourselves up as a physics community as an example, potentially, for how one can achieve gender equity in a specific discipline area. So I want to start with a couple of minor stories. One is a story of a friend I met who was part of a mid-sized department in the US, fairly senior. And he was telling me about their hiring procedures and saying that the dean's office would send back any list of candidates, of shortlisted candidates, the department submitted, if it felt it was not balanced in terms of diversity, in terms of having women, in terms of having minorities, visible minorities, etc. In India, I know of no analogous intermediate step. Once a selection committee meets and proposes that this is the candidate that we want to have, there is no further line of screening that says, have you balanced this group of people correctly? That, I think, is something that we could take from the US experience and incorporate it into ours, because in many ways, formal arrangements like this do make it easier for us to achieve what we want to achieve, rather than having individual departments, individual people having to rely on the common sense of individual people. It's good to make this structurally a structural feature rather than anything else. I remember trying some years ago to convince the head of an institution just to incorporate the simple wording, application in an advertisement for a job. The applications from women candidates and disadvantaged minorities are especially welcome. And I remember not succeeding. And the fear there was of potential litigation. If you had candidates who would come and say that, look, you did not select me, but you seem to be favoring certain classes of candidates. This is not permitted under the law. And therefore, we will render this whole selection process null and void. And usually institutions don't want to go in for this because that is a long and complicated legal procedure, and everything is on hold while that happens. The legal status of having a term like this has never been clarified to my satisfaction. I personally think it's okay, but it would be useful for institutions to understand whether you can include such statement. And that again would be a way of signaling to candidates that something like this would be useful. The larger problem, of course, both with the US and with India is that, so there's a specific problem with India that a lot of hiring is essentially non-functional. Forget about women. We have universities that have not hired for about 10 years, whether men or women, it doesn't really matter. And the increasing contingent faculty, the use of contingent faculty, who are basically hired on yearly contracts, is a phenomenon both in the US as well as in India. And this hits women especially hard because it's impossible to manage a family, to manage the demands of stuff, of work, of life outside of work if you rely on a contract that just goes from year to year. So here are a couple of minor points that I had to make, and we can return to these in the discussion. And one is, I want to return to the example of my own institution, and that is to have specific rules regarding the constitution of selection committees for faculty. For example, in my university, you cannot constitute a committee for a selection unless there is a woman expert present. And this is a rule that we have, and there's no way of circumventing this particular rule. The other example that we set at my university is levels of women. First of all, we have about 55% women students to about 45% men. That's our ratio. The vice chancellor of the university is a woman. 30 to 40% of senior positions at the university are held by women. A number of departments, heads of departments are women, and those who are not are usually very well aligned to principles of fairness, democracy, equity, and feminism in general. The second point I want to make is that it would be useful in India specifically to have a chart of hiring committees that says in the outset that we would favor, we would like you to ensure that you do not ignore for any reason the applications of competent women candidates or candidates in general from any type of disadvantaged minority. This doesn't happen. This is useful for younger members on these selection committees, but in general for all members on selection committees, to try to benchmark their behavior against what they have explicitly signed up to. Right now, the whole process is in a sort of fog, where you go to committees, you make recommendations, the names go up, the deliberations are not particularly transparent at that point. So if there was a point by which you could refer to an external document that suggested what it is that a committee is supposed to do in situations like this, that would be useful. As always, there are problems with intersectionality, and this Ramon referred to, in terms of, in India, the issues are often caste and womanhood, non-binary genders. These are all larger questions that most Indian institutions don't really have a framework for thinking about. And I think this is important for us to think about. It's important at the academic level. The Indian Academies of Science should be thinking about this, and professional organizations should also be thinking about it. The last point, of course, is numbers of applications. Nishita pointed out some numbers for the Indian context, but we still don't see the sort of numbers that would indicate a rough equality between women candidates and men candidates. And of course, you see a spectrum in both of these. There's no denying that. But I think overall, having larger numbers of women candidates applied, making sure that last sort of bottleneck between the postdoc and the job, or between the PhD and the job, is circumvented, that there are people who are champions of women candidates, their own students, for example, to stand up and be counted and make sure that the numbers of women overall, at all levels, this is school to college to PhDs, to postdocs, etc., are at a level where they're on a completely equal playing field with the men who might be there. I think that's also useful. So this is just a bunch of points that I had. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Gautam. Your points are very well taken, especially about expectation setting for committee members. I think that's something that's really missing. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, so we have one more panelist. It's my pleasure to also introduce Professor Meenakshi Narain, who is a professor of physics at Brown University and a fellow of American Physical Society. She is an affiliate faculty in the Brown Data Science Initiative, co-chair of the Campus Advisory Board at Brown, and past chair of Brown Physics Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. She's also a member of the committee of HEPAP and recently appointed to the APS Committee on Minorities in Physics. She's the first female collaboration board chair of US CMS and was co-chair of the CMS Diversity Office in 2018. So for those of you who might not know what CMS is, it's one of the large experiments at the Large Hadron Collider experiment and has about 5,000 people in the collaboration. So even within just one experimental collaboration, these issues could be fairly complicated. She serves as a regional representative from the United States in the management board of the CMS Experiment, and also serves as the co-convener of the Energy Frontier Group in the SNOMAS 2021 exercise. So again, sorry for the explanation, but SNOMAS is sort of this 5-year exercise that people in America or scientists in America do every 5 years to identify the directions which they should focus on. So yeah, we should also have something like that in India. I think it's a nice idea. Right. So she received her PhD from Stony Brook University after her master's from IIT Kanpur in India. She has had several leadership positions in D0 and CMS experiments, and is recipient of several grants. The list is far too big for me to finish it in a reasonable time. She's also a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard and a member of Sigma Psi and co-president of the Brown University Sigma Psi chapter. So Meenakshi, please, if you have something to say.
Thank you, Nishita, for a nice introduction and simplifying some of the terms in my bio. Appreciate that. So first, I'd like to thank IPA as well as APS for inviting me to be on this panel. It's quite an honor to be on this panel and discuss gender equity issues. And I echo quite a few things shared by many the three panelists ahead of me. And again, I want to echo the same thing, that I'm not really a professional trained in gender studies or such. I'm just a physicist, as also earlier it was said, we kind of use, I think by Suchit Na, that we are doing this because we've learned through our experiences and by navigating our careers. And what I want to do is sort of tell some examples of what I have been involved with and why. And literally, it define, and this many aspects of promoting gender equity defined my academic journey from the place I grew up, which is Gorakhpur in UP in India, to Providence, Rhode Island, as a professor at Brown University. So I think there's a chat thing saying whether people can hear me okay. Is this choppy? Then do I need to change anything? Okay, I'll continue, just let me know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share just a few slides here. And I would like to say that my focus of my research at the CMS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider is basically to, just like the 5,000 other people with a large participation from my Indian colleagues, is also to understand, how did the universe begin, and to understand the very first moments of our universe, what is concerning the structure and composition of matter, and how do they interact, etc. So we really try to look at the, sort of right after the Big Bang, what the particles and the interactions were, and how this universe came to be, and what we see right now, and how it's related to it. So this, for doing this, it is a large collaboration, as Nishita mentioned. It's one of the biggest equipment made by humankind, the Large Hadron Collider. And I'm not going to go into that, but we are a group of a large number of peoples with many different countries and many different cultures. And so in this CMS experiment, there are 3,000 scientists, which have not just trained physicists, but we have engineers, computer, software, professionals, etc. And we have 229 institutions currently collaborating from 51 countries. And the US scientists, which I represent, makes up about 30% of CMS experiment. And India is also quite a few members, and I'm going to show you some statistics there as well. So, so as was mentioned, I kind of represent the US contingent of about 1,000 people to the CMS experiment. And as such, there are, apart from having the scientific challenge that we are all involved in pursuit of our knowledge and publications, there are also personal dynamics and trying to involve different types of people with different identities, different cultures, which come together and really perform to their scientific potential. That's our goal. We are all scientists. We are all interested in the same thing and the same questions, and we should be able to contribute equally. And how can we do that? And we haven't quite figured it out. There are biases, and I should acknowledge it right away. And it's a very complex experiment, and it's created because no one country, no one group can afford the cost and the complexity of these detectors. So we all have to come together globally to really understand the very complex issues in particle physics. So while we are driven by physics, right, we need to assure that there is equitable participation by all. And what we need to make sure as senior people in the collaboration or the collaboration as a whole, that we provide access to opportunities and mentorship. And that is really critical in promoting gender equity, which we found from our experiences. And I'm going to quickly share like three different things, three different strategies promoting inclusiveness, mentorship, and faculty hiring process, which also are integral part of this large collaboration plan, and we've contributed here. So to the left in these various bar charts, it shows sort of time. So from 2015, each bunch of bar charts are from 2015 to 2019, the fraction of female members by different countries. And so you can see that within CMS, this is about 30% or so, whereas for the US, it's much less. And I didn't have the numbers for India, but for the US, it's similar, right? The graduate students as the second thing, block, and they have risen from 15 to 20% in the last 5 years, but the rightmost bunch here is pretty flat around 15%. So again, this is the same thing which Nishita said, and it's really something which we have to, no matter which country we are in, we still have to deal with gender equity issues, and some places are making progress and how we are making progress, and we also have to continuously do so. And here, I think, in my experience, there's not only one thing which has really leads to the solution, but there are many different small things we have to do. So what we have done is try to, as the US CMS and CMS collaboration, I've been involved in really making sure that we promote inclusiveness. And that will make sure that everybody has a sense of belonging to the community in an equal way. Otherwise, in the environment of a big experiment with different cultures, it can be very daunting and intimidating for if you're a small group, right? Whether it's a gender minority or other identities or whatever. So our focus is literally to and I'm going to just sort of say the first one, which has made the most difference, is to really understand that the multiculturalism, and we have to have an identity affirming approach, and that humanizes all of us. And only then we can really achieve inclusiveness. We haven't quite. We all talk about implicit biases and we have to work on that. But I think the first thing is to really make everybody belong, right? And I learned this actually in my PhD many, many years ago, when in my small lab of 12 people at that time, I had no issues about inclusiveness, gender imbalance, whatever, because of the environment which was set up by my thesis advisor. So it is the responsibility of us seniors to really understand what we are doing, and I'm really indebted to her. So, I learned a little bit from there, and then also I learned that mentorship is important. I went from Gorakhpur to Kanpur to the US because of the mentorship and the academic journey. In my academic journey, this mentorship was important. Though as women in physics, we all have a lot of tumultuous experiences. As a postdoc, was my first time in really understanding what the biases were. But even at that time, there were many mentors, male and females, and my champions, who are still the strongest mentors for me or champions for me. So that is really, really important. Mentoring is very important, and we have. So in CMS and US CMS, we focus on matched mentorship program. And it's not just for graduate students. It could be graduate students, postdocs, junior faculty, senior faculty, when even as a senior faculty, when we can get really stuck, right? You have awards and merits, and how do you promote each other? You have to think about it, how to position yourself at every point of your life. And so mentoring is very important in gaining that equity, because the more the people know you, they appreciate what you've done, some of these biases will go away. And I think Renee mentioned about the APS Conference for undergraduate women in physics, which is literally held nationwide in 10 universities, and about 1,500 or more women, undergraduates attend. And just by looking at each other, by networking with each other, there is a community which forms. They get mentorship, career advice, and everything. But they just, there is some something to be said if you see yourself sort of reflected in others around you. There is a confidence, there is a positive aspect to it. And I will be hosting one of those at Brown this year. And the last thing, which I'll just touch a little briefly, is the promoting through a hiring process, which Professor Menon went into quite a bit of detail. And it's the same thing. One thing is at the university level, and the other is at the faculty level. During the search process, we need to make sure we have enough applicants, and if not, go recruit them. That is one thing which I have, tried in our department, and in the last few years, we have succeeded in building this. Not everybody was initially, sort of sold to this, but over time, when we understood that this is actually making a difference, everybody kind of bought into this process. And NSF Advance and many, many institutions in the APS in US have started doing this. And so there are many templates available there to actually follow that. And if in India or other universities sort of follow, then at least it's a good path towards gender equity in hiring. And you evaluate everyone with the same scale, with the same norms. So at least you can have your implicit biases or unconscious biases as a whole committee sort of not too strong, but it kind of averages out, I would say. So I want to close by saying that small actions can really add up to make a big difference. And I just leave you with this quote from Judy France. I'm not going to read it. It's in the APS Gender Equity Workshop report in 2007. And I always remember that, and I share it with my students as well. So thank you for, this is sort of a few things which I personally am doing to hopefully make a difference.
Thank you very much, Meenakshi. So to get the ball rolling, so we already have a few questions which we will get to. So thank you very much for typing in the questions, and please type in more if you have any. Right, just to get the ball rolling, I would like to ask all of the panelists what, in their opinion, is the one thing that they would choose from this very knotty problem that should be perhaps tackled first. And also thinking about what Gautam said, how does the public versus private sector figure into this? Because in the Indian context, most educational institutes are public institutions. The private sector contribution is much smaller, whereas in the US, it's perhaps the opposite, and maybe that affords you more freedom to make those choices and decisions. So yeah, please.
So I can share some of my views. I can go, but if there are others, they want to speak. Because to me, what I see, the crux, the main issue of the problem, I can share some of my views.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Yeah, so maybe again, I would like to share some slides. So I think as Professor Narain, she mentioned, so maybe quickly, I'll just go through that. So the first thing that I have seen, this is from experience, is that, can you all see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing, what I have personally felt, and with no offense to anyone, is that sometimes what I see is that a lot of the efforts or some of the efforts that have been taken by institutions or communities or in our profession particularly is being driven by not driven by the fact that this is the right thing to do for the betterment or for the best outcome of science, or for the best thing to happen in our profession. That's not what comes to people's mind. They just think that, there is this regulation we have to follow. This is affirmative action we have to follow. Yeah, I have immense respect that, yes, we have to follow affirmative action. We have as public institutions, we have so much, we should have so much respect, and, we have to follow the equity principles and stuff. This is very important that we have equal dissemination of resources, and so everybody should get equal opportunity. But then what I feel is that people sometimes miss the real point, as Professor Narain, as Meenakshi said, that for the sake of physics community, I would say that, yes, she mentioned the CMS experiment. Yeah, I was looking at the LIGO paper. So this is the first LIGO detection paper. There are, I think, 1,500 plus authors. It's like 3 pages of authors. And why do we need so many people to work on an important problem? Because this problem is complex. Okay, it's not just in physics, as in other aspects of the society also. So the problem is very complex. It can't be done by 1 or 2 people. We need, like, we have multinational, like, many nationalities are taking part. They are investing money on these mega projects because these problems are very complex to solve. And that is why to get the best out, I mean, she was mentioning the CMS collaboration, so that this 5,000 people, so that they can give their best and we can have the best out from our profession, we should be heavily championing diversity, because it has been proven again and again that if we have a diverse group, then there's more creativity, more ideas come up, there's more vision, and lots of, in the intersection of diverse culture and diverse ideas, we are always more equipped, provided it's managed well. So that's where the management aspect comes. As she spoke, all the mentorship program, ensuring that everybody is able to give their best. But even before that, at the core, at the heart of it, is that we should be always very thrilled about bringing in and people from different, not because there is a regulation, it's because it's the best thing we can do to make physics or make science or make societies go in a better way, better direction. Now, quickly, I would say that my concern is awareness. So what I find is that people speak about gender equity. Now I'm talking in terms of gender equity, but it's like there's a compulsion. It's now the rule that we have to have a woman member in the panel, or there's this rule we have to follow. It's not that there is a rule we have to follow. This should be so much within us. And I feel that it's still the professional community, at least in India, what I see is that the government and the rules are probably ahead of how the professional community sees the problem. So my take is that the most important thing that we can do in physics, for example, is that increase awareness in whatever small way. I think I liked what Professor Narain said, that every single of us can add a little bit and make a big difference in a way that, for example, I like this very much, that we use always gender neutral vocabulary. So for example, we always use MS and not Miss or Mrs. As is mostly done in many places, but still I see Indian application forms where you have to write Miss or Mrs. and I just unhappy about it. Or no chairman, this is a chairperson. It's not that it's coming to our community gradually, but it has to be enhanced, and we should have lot more awareness, lot more open discussion in our institutions, in our departments, in our conferences, so that it becomes such a natural and driving force from all of us, and not something that, it is something that we have to do. It should not be that way. It's something we do for our betterment. That should be the way to go. And the awareness programs and the awareness aspect is most important in my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchit Na. Would somebody else like to also comment? Maybe from the American side, what you think would be a good first step?
I would say that one of the most important things is to remember that it's not the responsibility of the oppressed to remove their oppression. It's the responsibility of the oppressors and the people that hold the majority stake in the community. So one argument that I would make is it's important that there's a lot of allyship from man and male colleagues in physics. to uplift the voices of women in physics and take their directives to make that change that needs to be made. So I think the role of allyship can't be understated, and it's everyone's responsibility, and particularly those of us that are in the majority, which includes me, to facilitate and push for change that incorporates the views, vision, and voices of the communities that are impacted most. And I say that because, again, the burden shouldn't just fall on the people that are the ones that are underrepresented and marginalized. It's on all of us to support our colleagues and peers.
Thanks, Ramon. Yes, Gautam, please.
Yeah, I can add that I think a lot of this is also just good leadership and setting a good example. And I think the principal scientific advisor to the Indian government, to the Prime Minister, makes it a point to call out manuals whenever he sees them. So he will write to you and say that, look, why have you constructed a group of people at a meeting where I see that 90% of them are men and only 10% there's a total woman in that. That's very important, I think. And I think organizations such as Bias Watch, which keep a track of gender ratios in conferences on a more general level and publishes this on Twitter and so on for everyone to see. I think these are important. Calling it out when you see it. Leadership, especially at high levels, is also very important. And structural changes, so that, the committee responsibilities, clarifying those, I think are also important in the Indian context. I mean, I sort of see India as having so many problems that it's sort of hard to focus just on this. I think just getting hiring of anybody, forget about man or woman, is such a problem that this seems to sort of come a little bit downstream of these much larger problems that education institutions in the public domain are facing at the moment. But we have to do all of this together in whichever way we can.
Right. Thank you. Both of these are very interesting points. So there are actually leading questions on both of these directions. So based on one of the questions that is already in the chat box by Jessica Bickel, and also something that we had in our list, is one of the things that happens by requiring women, for every panel to have a woman or so on, is that the few women that are in the field sort of get overburdened with requests to appear on every single panel or to give their opinion about every single thing, even on things that they might not necessarily be experts on. So, or want to comment on. So, are there any thoughts about this, and in general, the imbalance of service expectations that fall on women as compared to their male colleagues?
It's absolutely true. The only solution is to hire more women. This is not a solvable problem with the number of women that you have at the moment. It vastly increases their service responsibilities, and especially in India, where certain committees have to have, for example, the committees on sexual harassment, for example, must have women at that. And so already these are stressful and difficult committees to be on, and that putting women on those committees in addition to other committees really overloads them. And as I said, there is no long-term solution unless there are more women in the profession.
I agree with you. I think this is also we grapple with, even in the US, where the gender equity gap is a little smaller, not completely gone, and it's closing with a lot of work. Women are on every committee. I can even tell you a personal story that I was asked to be on a search committee of hiring when I was, this was many years ago, when I was expecting a child and on maternity leave because they needed to have one. And this is what was my answer was, then go hire more, because why should I be doing that? And we have to be really protective of our younger assistant professors who we are hiring also, that they do not get into these situations. And clearly it has to be an equity so everybody can perform, but their tasks and have an equal service load. But women everywhere get to do this higher service load, and this really hampers their research also. So one has to really make sure that when it comes to evaluating the publications for promotions, it has to be balanced with their service work, much, much higher service work. In tenure and promotion cases in the US, teaching is there, then research, those two are higher, which is what I understand if everything works perfectly, and service work has much less weight. But now if for female candidates, you really want to have them because you lack, people to sit on these committees, then you have to make that a bit higher for them. And you have to, and it is our responsibility to promote these issues and continuously talk about it and be an activist about it. Otherwise, this will not change, and start saying no.
So this is very good, Meenakshi, that you pointed out. And another thing I want to bring up is like you mentioned about mentoring program and how mentor made a huge difference in your career and your life. So I want to ask, what are the mentoring programs that are like institutional support in that sense, like available to the young scientists in US? And also, I think this is a very relevant question for India. What are the gaps or what already exist in terms of institutional support?
Yeah, so for institutional support, so when we have, we have mentoring in our department at all levels. So you could have peer mentors for undergraduates. So while they have mentors, so we have advisors, which are faculty advisors for every student. So we have every faculty advisor has 10 students or depending on the size of your program, but 10 to 15 students you could have to advise as an undergraduate level. But they also have they could have a peer advisor where the first years could have a senior person as their mentee, right? So this would be, so mentor-mentee pairs could be within the group or, as more of a senior-junior match. Similarly, for graduate students, for PhD students, we always have a faculty mentor assigned to a student and in the first few years, they don't have to be the thesis advisor, because sometimes what happens is if you have some issues or things which you have to navigate with your thesis advisor, having somebody independent know you right from the beginning and be able to be in the discussion as a committee helps, because then they get to know you, they can adjudicate in case issues arise over many years, of course, and so that helps. And then when we have assistant professors come in, then we always have some mentorship for these assistant professors. Sometimes people feel kind of odd that people are coming and viewing my teaching, but over time, when you explain that this is positive for you to build your career and we are trying to help and support you rather than be critical of you, I think they are more amenable for taking that, right? And getting comfortable with you. Otherwise, the power dynamics of a full professor to an assistant professor, can become very difficult. So you have to make sure that while, senior professors are giving you advice, the atmosphere is more about getting to know each other, building their career, being your ally and champion rather than, being critical of your research or teaching or whatever, or your grant funding. So those dynamics have to be carefully evaluated and constantly understood. And, if this doesn't work out, always in this mentor-mentee-ship relationship, we also say there is a way out. You can confidentially talk to the department chair and they can navigate the next year, or they can also help you have somebody else talk to without really insulting or making a tensed environment for you. So there are various ways to do it. And this is also how we do it in a large collaboration as well, where people are from completely different institutes, right? They're not even from the same institutes, but they could be in the same analysis group or the same detector group and things like that. So you have to be very careful and provide many different options. And a person could have two different mentors. One is a peer mentor and the other is a faculty mentor. One could be your academic mentor in terms of research mentor, and one could be a teaching one, right? So it doesn't hurt to seek out yourself if you want advice.
Thank you. So Chetna or Gautam, you want to?
Gautam, do you want to say a few words?
No, I'm fine. I agree with that.
Yeah. I guess in India, I'm not sure, but this student mentorship, I think there's still a lot of scope, and people understand that there are, this faculty-student mentorship, but junior faculty being mentored by senior faculty, I don't see that to be so common in India. I mean, at least not you can have a personal level thing, but as an institutional level support system where you actually have senior colleagues to guide you or things like that, that's probably not something that I frequently see. Maybe Gautam, do you want to?
No, I agree with that. I mean, whatever mentoring arrangements I've seen, I usually tend to be informal and not formal.
Yes.
And in most places, I think there is no arrangement for a formal, there is no official requirement of a formal mentoring relationship. In my university here, we have sort of students mentored by faculty members, have students associated with them. But that's about it. I don't think there's a sort of young assistant professor being mentored by a full professor arrangement in most
and then,
places that I know of.
In universities, I don't know about research institutions, but in universities, we have some orientation program where which junior faculty are supposed to take. But then they are not very useful in the sense that, it talks about, some guidelines, your service rules, etc. But that's really nothing to do with mentoring you to sort of cope up with the professional community that you're part of. So that should be a very important thing that we must talk about and start in our institutions in India, which is support for, because it's a very stressful stage of their life when they have to deal with so much of things. When you come as a young assistant professor, it's really, really stressful. And the mentoring and support system is definitely something that can help through.
And certainly, being a young faculty, I can vouch for it as well. Like, this is really important. So I think, yeah.
That's great. So I think we've identified at least, we've identified many things, but that's definitely one point that we've identified for the Indian side, which is to provide more mentoring, which currently seems to be almost completely absent. Right. So, so we have a follow-up from Jessica after answering the earlier question. And I'm just going to paraphrase because the question is too long. Maybe you can also see the Q&A box. I'm sure the panelists will be able to see. But the question is essentially, how do junior members, especially junior female members, change the system, because they usually seem to not have enough power and just get chastised by telling them, don't reinvent the wheel. This is how things have always been done. So are there any ideas or suggestions of how to handle a situation like this?
I can confidently say that the situation is worse in India than it is in the US for a specific reason. That when you hire, the rules are such that you have to be 2 levels above the person who you are hiring. So that essentially means that if you want to hire as an assistant professor level, the only people present in that committee have to be professors and above. This automatically constrains your pool of sensible people considerably if you're with that restraint. And I think the US does it much better in the sense it has, you can have junior people, a mix of junior, senior people, etc., on a hiring and shortlisting committee. That ought to change here. It's unfortunately a government rule. Mm-hmm. And most institutions are somewhat wary of violating that, again, for fear that that they may be taken to court for any violations of that. So again, as I said, a lot of this is structural. Mm-hmm. These structures have to change. Only then can we expect real change in other ways.
Yeah, perhaps there can be some sort of distinction between decision-making power and the power to just speak up. I think these two need not be conflated, right? Maybe the final decisions are only taken by the people who are 2 levels senior, but that doesn't mean nobody else is allowed to comment, which perhaps does happen informally anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, for example, probably in the US, only the tenured people get to vote. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So, so that's kind of like, but then in the search committee, I think there are junior people. I mean, that's not a problem. It's just the subject representation that mostly matters. Yeah.
However, even in the search committee, when there is a junior person, and if a senior person is very much promoting a few candidates, it can be difficult for the junior members to speak up, right? Even by being on the committee doesn't solve all the problems. So one way, which have been suggested by these NSF advanced programs, is to have these, rubrics of evaluation, and people could evaluate. So the committee members could all evaluate that and share with each other. Whereas what we have also done at times is that you ask even, all assistant professors to anonymously fill out those, right, and give it. So you have a pile of, input about those rubrics, about the comments, which are anonymous, but from a group which is very capable of giving advice without repercussions. And this is, again, getting input rather than decisions, right? So if those input are very different from what the committee has been thinking, maybe they'll stop and reevaluate their thinking as to why this is, and try to incorporate some of the junior members' comments. But clearly, there is, there are ways of anonymous input, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I can share my personal story. When I was a PhD student in Pittsburgh, we were hiring like every year, and so there were even cases. So the faculty candidate used to meet the graduate students, and there were cases where the committee kind of thought highly of a candidate, but then the graduate students like voted them down, and it was still the committee was still like, oh my God, the graduate students don't like this person, so maybe I don't know what is, and they were asked. So it's not that our decision was, we had anything to say in the decision making, but the chair of the committee used to hear our voice, that what the graduate students think about this particular person. And in one occasion, I can say that someone was really not considered because univocally all the graduate students said that we did not enjoy the interaction with that person, and we're not sure how they will be as a teacher. But I guess, the hiring thing in US is so different from India. I mean, with my little experience, I can say Gautam probably has more experience, and we have a lot of other senior colleagues in the meeting today, in the panel discussion, in the audience today. I think this is like very, very different. I think US hiring, and I'm not sure. I mean, in India, because there are so many government rules and, constraints that we have to follow. So, Gautam, would you want to maybe talk? You might have more experience about it. This is my personal feeling that is very different. The hiring thing, I mean, in India, I feel that it's pretty hierarchical, very hierarchical, and there are so many rules by which probably there's a lot more constraint. So maybe there are experts in this meeting who can have suggestions on how can we make it more equitable and all the things that even Meenakshi was mentioning.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is that we do have a bias training here, that the committee members have to go through, which is very, very important. I don't know if you have something like structural, over there in India or not, but I would say that is very useful because we all have biases, and, without, going through the training process, we can all be, very much blind towards them.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's perfect segue to talking about bias training. So this is, I think, something that is not addressed at all, as far as I'm aware, in the Indian context. So it would be nice to know what exactly bias training involves, and what kind of implementations can be possible in the Indian context, especially as Gautam mentioned, every small thing sort of leads to fear of litigation, and it's extremely complicated to formulate something that might actually work in such a large space. So yeah, just let's start with what kind of bias, what exactly is bias training, and what can be sort of learned from the US experience.
I'm going to take this. So the implicit bias training, which we do before people review these applications for faculty searches, is the implicit bias training which Harvard offers. And this is.
You mean just the questionnaire? So they just take the questionnaire and learn
they do
whether
this online. Yeah, you have to input. So then at the end of it, they tell you what is your bias levels, right? It's very personal. So, and then there is I can send you the template from Harvard, which we had followed and modified for our local one, was take the implicit bias training, and then there was a list of things as to how to, pick out words which are unconscious biases and which have, portray differences in how people describe female researchers versus male researchers at various steps of the process. So they have a kind of a cheat sheet on that, which people are asked to read and think about it. So it's more about a self-guided implicit bias as well as a self-guided unconscious bias. You are encouraged to read this prior to reviewing. There is no law in the US, at least in all institutions, that you have to do it. It's one of the best practices. I believe, Jyoti, you kind of have the same way as best practices. And everybody follows it because we all have a bias, whether male or female. And for me, just getting the answers and say, oh, okay, so the next time I'm going to read it, I'm going to think about it, that I have this bias. So I have to figure out, did I make this judgment or this decision, and how would this bias may have, sort of guided it or not. So you have to, it's a self-check.
And I think this is where, Gautam has mentioned before, structural changes, this is where the structural change has to be made. Like for us, it was kind of semi-compulsory because our College of Sciences was doing it. So it's like kind of mandatory that we have to go through it. And they had like, the whole presentation about it and, made us think about it. So yeah.
Okay, we have another question, which is now slightly different from what we were discussing, which is about how to encourage more female students, because in a lot of places they seem to have very few female applicants to begin with. So,
Nishita, I was just trying to say that, can you hear a little bit from Raman on the bias thing? Because
yes,
he might have more expertise on, I was just thinking that if he wants to share a few words about, because he's in this,
Sure. Thank you for that suggestion. I appreciate it. I would say one important idea that we were implementing here at the University of Utah is we actually have someone on the committee whose sole goal and role is to ensure that there is equity in the hiring process. So I think one tactic that you can take is having a person like that on the committee. And I think one of the challenges with bias trainings is the people who need to hear it the most will probably hear it the least. So, and the people that are probably going to be most engaged with the training are going to be the people that already probably will have the fewest biases themselves. And then there's the people on the fence, which are the ones that you can possibly reach to get to the other side of the fence. But I would say that these trainings aren't enough. You actually have to have a holistic review of the process to understand what is happening in the process, both formatively and then also summatively. So you want to be thinking about it as you go through the process, but then also you want to look back at the process. So when I hear folks talking about, ensuring that the short lists and the long lists are actually equitably created, that would be the summative, right, at the end. But the formative is, as you read the applications, think about, how are you assessing them? How are people talking about the candidates? And here's the reality too with hiring. And of course, I've only hired postdocs. I've hired 4 postdocs. I have not hired a faculty member. So I don't have the experiential component, which is why I'm glad that this panel is diverse in our academic situations, because we have that perspective from other people. But that looking backwards and making sure that you had some equity in the hiring is really critical. But if you want to hire people that look different, in any kind of way, and I don't mean physically, but just are different than what we traditionally see in physics, hiring has to be different, right? It's going to inherently be different. And a concrete example I have is for one of the postdocs that I was hiring. One of the letter writers didn't send me a letter, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on, and it was an important person to send the letter. So normally the protocol would be, well, if the dissertation advisor doesn't send the letter, well, we're just not going to consider the applicant because that's a bit of a red flag. But instead, I reached out to the dissertation advisor and I said, hey, could we just meet for half an hour to talk? And we ended up meeting, discussing the candidate, and it had nothing to do with the candidate at all. The dissertation advisor just had told the person that they were too busy, they were having COVID-related issues in their family, and this was why they didn't write a letter. So it actually had nothing to do with the letter writer, it just had to do, or excuse me, with the candidate, it just had to do with the letter writer's, what was going on in their life right now. And the letter writer also happened to be a woman in physics as well, and the candidate also was a woman in physics. So I think we have to go out of our way to make the interview process and how we think about applicants to be different in a lot of circumstances. So that would be my little addition there.
Thank you. That was interesting. Though it would also be interesting to see how this recommendation scales. It might be okay for a postdoc application, might not be okay for a larger search. But yes, for sure, I think places where we can allow a personal human touch would definitely benefit from, would be easier to fix rather than large bureaucratic processes, which are quite opaque. Gautam, did you have something to say?
No, this is just a thought, and I wanted to run it past Ramon about, I think implicit bias training is important. I was just wondering what the cultural component is. Would you use the same training in the US as you would in India? Because I can imagine that the cultural component would be fair, the social and cultural component, and the milieu would be fairly different. So I was just wondering what your experience was on that, or what your thoughts were on that.
I don't know if I have too much experience on that, but I can give you my thoughts. I would say that the context is incredibly important because issues of equity, inclusion, issues of identity are contextual as well as temporal, right? They change over time. How we view gender now is completely different than how we viewed it in the 1950s, right? What Maria Goeppert-Mayer went through getting her Nobel Prize in the 1960s is very different than, what folks are going through now. What Alan Turing went through in the UK in the 1950s is very different than what folks are going through now. So I think that cultural competency component is huge, and I could not, I could personally not speak to the context in India. I would say that it's your communities and your experts that would really have to come forward and have those culturally competent conversations.
So Gautam, can I just add one point here? I think there are a lot of questions, so maybe it would be interesting to hear what the audience are discussing. But I think one thing I can tell you, this is again, I have heard from many of my women colleagues that this marriage issue, I mean, in the interview, they're being asked that, are they married? I mean, that's actually, I think in the US that's banned probably. Do you know what's the status in India? Are we allowed to actually ask these questions? I mean, legally, are we allowed, or are we prohibited from asking some questions? And I have even heard that people ask these questions and they feel that, actually, I'm trying to help you out because if you are married, then I will have some suggestions for you and stuff like that. So I guess, I mean, I understand your point that the cultural aspect plays role, but then again, I would think that there is some kind of universality in it that maybe we can follow when we do this bias training, or what you can do and can't do during a faculty interview process, let's say. I mean, for example, you can't ask anybody their marital status. That's for sure.
So Suchit, I will just make one comment. I went through this process of being hired 3 years ago, and I was asked this question in US. So believe me, there are people here also, they are not supposed to ask and they know it, but they still ask. So it's still there here in US.
I was just hired in the US 3 years ago as well, and these questions are absolutely 100% illegal. And I was asked about whether or not I had children.
Okay, so we also have another question about how does work and family balance work in the US as and India? So just a comparison question. So to set the stage, maybe we could just address a few points based on what kind of policies there are for family leave or policies to help families, and if there are any provisions for, say, early career people who might also have young families and so on. So yes, maybe we can, yeah, and anyone who would like to start, please.
I think I have been speaking a lot, so I would request someone else to start. I can add something. Meenakshi, do you want to?
Yes, sure. I don't have much of it in India, but I can tell you a little bit on in the US over time. That so now there is a family leave is a maternity or paternity leave for child birth is quite common, and every university has that for faculty, and some places do that also for graduate students, especially maternity leave. There's no paternity leave for graduate students for childbirth. And however, for postdocs, that's kind of, or the research scientists who are totally on grants and not on institution payments, direct payments, they don't have this protection. And this is something which we need to work on in the US and in physics or other domains as well. So this is kind of, and then for child, so depending on the universities, childcare could be very different. On an average, when you go to some conference, and if you have childcare issues, then people pay it by themselves, right? There is no grant to get childcare. There are a few places like APS for conferences. They do give childcare subsidies, but it's a fraction of that. However, nowadays, many institutions have started to provide childcare benefits, not just to the faculty, but also to staff, in the sense of this is a loved one care. So over the year, you could get 100 hours of benefits for childcare or elderly parent care or anyone's, right? So that's all because family care, you could have older parents to take care of or children to take care of. And so those kind of benefits are provided by a third party, but the university subsidizes it very much per hour. So those are starting to come up, but there is no, for childcare, there's not much there. So in that family leave, but if you have a child, a sick child to care for, or a sick parent for a long term, there is no such leave you can apply for. It's mostly for childbirth, right?
And what is the current maternity leave policy? Is there such a thing, or is it just?
Yeah, so it's generally a semester, 4 months. And that's also the Family Medical Leave Act, which is the federal policy. So it kind of mirrors that. So so it is, and work-life balance is promoted a lot these days, right? We have to make sure that also for graduate students and postdocs who are, if they leave the field, then the equity will never be established. So
yes,
those are. Mm-hmm.
It's my impression, although I could be wrong, that the situation regarding family leave, maternity, etc., is better in India than in the US. It's actually very good on paper. And it's usually, I think institutions respect that and they do take care of it. I'm not sure what happens, as I said, the shift towards having large contingent faculty, what rights they have. They're probably much more circumscribed than regular full tenured faculty members at all levels. But legally, I think the situation is actually fairly good in India.
Mm-hmm. So, Nishita, I would like to add. So, I think Shubhabati mentioned the Hyderabad Charter. I mean, this came out from the Pressing for Progress conference in 2019, which we had at University of Hyderabad. And if any of you go and see the recommendations list, then the first thing is about this work-life balance policy. And I think one of the big concerns, and this came up in many gender conferences that I have been, is that in India, although the rules are good, I mean, yes, they are, you get big maternity leave. Maternity leave is different, but child care leave, that's not gender neutral. And that creates an additional problem. So I think the first recommendation in the Hyderabad Charter that we put up, or our colleagues took the major initiative to put up, is that make all childcare policies gender neutral. And the reason for that is that if you don't make it gender neutral, if you really think that, oh, women can take, the mother can take the childcare leave, then you are implicitly assuming that childcare is and that's a gender stereotyping, that childcare is the responsibility of the mother. So this is the first recommendation in the Hyderabad Charter, that whatever family leave, childcare leave that is there in government rules, make it gender neutral, because otherwise it comes the other way. And but my colleagues gave examples. So one of my colleagues in biology, she cited an example that so one of her the postdocs' in-laws, families, were actually forcing them to take the leave and say that, oh, you have this leave, why don't you take this leave and do these things at home? And so it's being misused, and it's just, so sometimes they are being pressured to take, because since only women can take that leave, and that actually is affecting the careers of many women. So making childcare policies, work-life balance policies gender neutral is the first recommendation in the Hyderabad Charter. So
I think that is also true about mobility allowances and so on in India, right?
That's right.
A wife is allowed to put her job on hold if her husband is moved somewhere else, but not the other way around.
Yeah, that's right. So that also has to be gender neutral, is the recommendation.
That's an excellent point. Yes. Right. So before we open up to questions from the audience, voice questions from the audience, one last thing I would like to touch upon is what is your opinion about affirmative action kind of initiatives? So there are two things in particular. So there has recently been this idea of having a woman chair professorship that has been announced. So one of the worries is that this just makes parallel leagues rather than actually promoting visibility. Just have another league, and you no longer have to consider women in the standard awards or whatever categories. And the other related but so independent question is, what is your opinion about these Athena Swan type initiatives? Is there any evidence of them working? Has there been any improvement that has been observed? If you know, it's more a European thing, but if you know what that is.
Yeah, Athena Swan, I think, is a British UK thing, if I'm right. So maybe some of you want to speak about it, about if you know about the outcomes of the Athena Swan. What was the outcome? So did it work positively, etc.?
Sorry, it might be a bit tangential, but the reason to bring it up is that there seems to be a lot of effort on the Indian front to design something very similar to the Athena Swan framework, which is essentially to identify benchmarks against which Indian institutions can be judged whether or not they comply with the diversity and inclusive initiatives and so on. So yeah, it was it's a question if it's possible that similar things also exist in the US.
So in the US, there has been talk about Athena Swan, and I know that there is a group from NSF which is funded to do certain things, and I personally have attended some of these meetings in the Northeast, but it hasn't really taken off as it has in the UK. In the UK, a lot of universities participate, and if you are at a benchmark, then you can be avoided a bronze or a silver or a gold status, and that kind of is a measure of how well you are doing in meeting your benchmarks. But the US institutions, it hasn't quite taken off yet. For us, the NSF Advanced program did quite a bit of work in terms of institutional transformation and providing the benchmarks, and many universities are following. But who knows, maybe after this NSF pilot project, maybe it's distributed, so maybe in a year or so we can still continue to watch about this one. apart from Athena Swan, there is this in Sweden, there is this Genie project, right? Which also has a similar institutional transformation to put. But all of these generally cost, have investment of funding, right, at some level. So you have to see where you want to invest and where the problems are, whether you want a retention of graduate students or postdocs and help them to find the jobs, or retention of junior professors, etc. So it is very specific to the campus and the culture.
I would add that it's important to remember that representation isn't everything. It is obviously important, but the culture and the policies and things like that are what, from my perspective, I have put a lot more focus on recently, because we can have equal representation, but if we have equal representation and people are still having bad experiences, we haven't achieved our goal.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. The main goal is to reduce negative experiences and to make anyone who wishes to join the community able to join the community.
Yeah, so that's exactly the point I was trying to make, that regulations, I think, are important because that gives us sort of the legal premise to implement certain things. But then also, as Raman said and others said, that the culture in the professional community is even more important than that. That if you bring someone, you believe in affirmative action, and you bring in someone to sort of show to the government policy that yes, we are obliged, we are following this, and then this person faces immense difficulty. I mean, there are many cases of this minority caste representations, and there were issues where faculty members who were hired through affirmative action drives actually did face difficulty on campus. This has happened. So yeah, the culture is very important. Representation is very important, but I think having this equitable culture is even more important. And in my opinion, that can only come through awareness. I mean, we always talk about it, we always discuss it, and we make it like this is our existence, that we have to champion diversity. I would think that way.
Yeah, so going to the next question in the Q&A, which also sort of is related to this discussion, is that perhaps people who most need sensitivity training are the people who are most resistant to taking part in such training. So Cecilia asked what can be done about ensuring that everybody gets training, and especially those who are resistant.
I don't see any problem with mandating it. We mandate all sorts of stuff in India. We mandate sort of, oaths, communalism day, something, etc. We mandate lots of stuff that people are supposed to do.
Yes.
So I don't see why with good leadership, we can't mandate something like this. It would be useful, I think. Yes, in the US, there may be a little more resistance, I think, to sort of thinking of this as an infringement. I think in India, you could do it. You said you just have to do this.
So I actually asked in a related question, is there any official recommendation from the government of India about?
Not that I've seen. Not that I've seen.
So for sexual harassment, at least UGC, the University Grants Commission, they have a recommendation that every student, for students, it's there, that they will have to do this undertaking that, they understand sexual harassment and would comply with the laws and punishments if they're found guilty, etc. In fact, in my university, all the students have to submit this affidavit that yes, the sexual harassment, I think anti-racism and something
anti-ragging,
else. Anti-ragging, yes, anti-ragging, anti-racism, and sexual harassment. So that can be implemented even at faculty, staff, everybody level, if the government wants. Not done of now, but I think there are some proposals that we might make them mandatory for all, public institutions running on public money or grant applications and everything, that you have to take this undertaking. That this is mandatory.
Add to that, NSF and DOE and other granting agencies in the US do, want, if there is a what we call the Title IX violation, which is sexual harassment or sexual assault, or any other type of harassment, the universities have to report that. And if the PI is involved in that, they have to report it to the funding agencies, and their funding will be taken away. So it is very strict, and that really helps in really, once there are examples, that consequences will be there. People do, vouch for their actions. At least there's some effect. And I think that was really good in terms of both, all the funding agencies having it in the class that the universities have to report.
Great, thank you. So we have another question from an audience member. Praveen, I've unmuted you, so you're allowed to talk now.
Nishita, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, respected panelists. That your valuable discussion is very fruitful. I think if it is in the earlier discussions was mentioned that India is getting up to a private sector from majority government dominated education institutions to private sectors. That is a good move. So in this scenario, I think it only depends upon how much a individual faculty member, whether it might be a male or a female, how much one can bring funding, right? That is what the selection criteria should be eventually, because in order to carry out the experimental research, because theoretical research you can do with a minimal amount of money, but in order to conduct the experimental research, you need to have a huge infrastructure. And not only that, you need to have a lot of networking. So taking this into consideration, if we come up with all these, earlier I also have pointed out, that is there any official recommendation? We are saying that, that marriage is, of course, everything, but funding agency doesn't take into consideration these facts, right? Whether it is an industrial funding agency or any semi-governmental funding agency or the government funding agency, whoever is giving the funds only expects that the project will be completed in time or not. So I believe I do agree that equal representation should be there. In fact, if one is proven to be more capable, in fact, in that case, women should be given the priority. I mean, in that case, it is not about the woman or men. It is about the able person. It's the capabilities. I have seen, in fact, very recently, off late, people say that we are doing that, we are doing this, and in reality, there is nothing. And we want to compete with America and Western countries who are far ahead of us 2 or 3 generations.
Yeah, Praveen, I think Shubhavati can answer this question much better because she's heading the policy.
May I know who is it? May I know who is it?
Shubhavati Goswami, who spoke at the beginning. Shubhavati, if you
it will be very nice because she's also part of Indian Newton Observatory, which is a stalled project for 2 decades. Very many people were involved in it, and government is very much serious on it.
Shubhavati, do you want to answer this
Nishita,
question?
There was a little bit of disturbance. Can you?
Yeah, so I think the main question is that there seems to be a lot of discussion, but how do we ensure that the recommendations from this discussion and so on will be implemented at the government level or at the private funding level? So do you have any ideas about how that can be done?
I think this is a very relevant point, and what is my experience is that many times it is not really implemented. For instance, I can give you example of mobility allowance, mobility scheme. Even though it is only for women, sometimes women are facing problem from their institute to take it, even though they have got the scheme awarded from GST, there can be some issues. So I think it is very pertinent point that, we are discussing, we are making some recommendations, but how far is it implemented? So that's why we have to try. Although I will say this, that a lot of things have been already implemented. Like, for instance, the Kiran scheme, which was earlier for this women with breast or even if you see the mobility allowance or the childcare leave. So these things have been implemented. So it is not that nothing is implemented, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time, more time than it should. That's what I feel. So, but one good thing is that this STEEP document, which DST has proposed, in that all this there is a separate gender equity and inclusion charter in which many of the things are mentioned. So one has to see again at the implementation level how it is to be done. I think all the gender groups have to send these recommendations to government, and even from the inter-academy panel also this is being planned. So that is the only way I see that, we have to keep on trying. And I think that one good point is that, which we discussed recently in the inter-academy panel meeting, is that, the involving the institutional leaders. In Hyderabad's charter also we have mentioned that it is very, very important to sensitize institution leaders so that the gap between the, a scheme and its implementation is reduced.
Maybe we can move on to the next question if there are.
Yeah, so we don't have any live questions at the moment. So if anybody has any comments, Prajwal, would you like to say something? Would you like to... If you have some comments based on your experience about implementation and so on.
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yes, yes.
So what did you want me to comment on?
Your experience about making recommendations and how they were followed, or yeah, whatever you have to comment on the situation, on how it can be improved.
Well, there's a lot to comment on. To say it very briefly, I think the Hyderabad Charter is a good step because it has made people think about how to practically implement. It gives people a starting document, and also it is both top-down and bottom-up. Other than that, I just have to say that I agree fully with many of the things that Raman said, especially the thing that the onus should be on the institutions to change the climate, change the culture. Leadership definitely helps, but the recognition of culture change is very important. Programs which only focus on numbers and disparity will not make much headway. It also becomes a problem as to how do you encourage young people to join a profession when you know that the profession cannot provide a healthy climate. So that conundrum does need to be broken.
So Shobana, I think you also have some comments to make.
Yeah, I wanted to say I've been on various committees, task force on women in science, standing committee on women in science. We've had our meetings, we've made our recommendations, and as far as I know, that's where it ended. Nothing really followed up because I feel the government wants to make grand gestures. It wants to have a big scheme, a flashy scheme. The problem in India is our policies are not so bad, actually. It's the implementation that is lacking. And people don't feel they get a lot of brownie points for implementing a policy to check whether people actually have the daycare centers and creches that they're supposed to, whether they have the toilets for women. I mean, these are the things that are on the ground, which are not very glamorous, but make life difficult for women to continue working. And I mean, I think Gati is a good move. It is again a big program, but these little things will combine to create a climate that is hostile or favorable for women. So hopefully we will see some change with that. I really don't know how it will pan out. I don't know. It's not yet clear to me in Gati. Gati, for those of you who don't know, is our version of Athena Swan. It's not clear what is going to be the inducement for institutions to take part and get a high ranking, because it just has to be, is it just prestige, or are there going to be other carrots that are waved in front of them to get a high ranking? So sometimes it's a little frustrating because we've all been saying the same things for many years. But I do find that in the last 5 years or so, there is a younger generation who is doing new things. I think things like Life of Science, Bias Watch India, these are all very good movements which were not government funded. They were just independent initiatives, but I think they have sort of energized the climate and the discourse. And also things like the Women in Physics Conference and the Hyderabad Charter. These are all things which I see as sort of, as I said, energizing the environment around this topic.
Thank you, Shobna. So since we have only about 5 minutes before end of program, maybe I can ask all the panelists to have, what would be their takeaway from our discussion today? So perhaps we can start with Ramon.
It's all of our responsibilities to make change and to support people who are marginalized and minoritized in the field of physics, and make sure that we all act as allies and agents to make change by centering the voices, perspectives, and experiences of the people that are most impacted. So that's what I would add.
Thank you. Suchit Na?
Well, I think I will end with two comments from two very famous people. One is Jocelyn Bell Burnell. And as I think Gautam also mentioned, that sometimes we often make programs and we discuss the problem of women's representation in physics, for example, in a way that you need to encourage women, women lack confidence and stuff like that. But I think a lot of the discussions that came up today, and we have been saying that this is a structural problem. Women are totally fine and absolutely there is no problem with them. It's a structural problem in our profession that we have to work. And so I think she made a fantastic comment in the ICW IP 217 where she said, we don't need to fix the woman, we need to fix the system. So that's my first. And the second is, of course, I'm a very hopeful person. So since we're talking about gender, I just brought out this quote from Harvey Milk. And he said that, I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living, and you gotta give them hope. So no matter how little progress we made, we definitely made progress. There is progress. We are making changes. We now have women directors in leading institutions in India, which was not the case even 5 years back. So we have women directors in leading institutes. We have a woman president of the Astronomical Society of India. So we are making changes, and we have to stay positive, keep hoping, and keep making the changes that we think will add to the best of our profession. I think that's what I would add.
Thanks. Gautam?
I think as Shobana said, my view is that the gradient is positive. Things are changing, especially now. There are many very nice initiatives, like the ones you mentioned, both Bias Watch of the Life of Science and a bunch of other things. I would think that one major issue that we really could prioritize or should prioritize is men as allies. I mean, if every man was an ally, we wouldn't have been talking about this at all. So I don't see why that shouldn't take a little more effort. Why that it should not be, in a sense, the current frontier for thinking about this. And then everything, I think, will fall into place. That may be easier to say than do, but I think that's certainly a sort of positive note on which I'd like to end.
Thank you. Meenakshi?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, there are small actions which eventually will add up to make a big difference, but it's very difficult to even get those small actions implemented, as we discussed as well. So I think we have to continue to be activists, even though it can get tiring, especially for women, because you have to be there all the time. But we also really ask people to not, come up with just policies, show them the gaps in the policies, and make them implement it. And we all should feel the responsibility for implementing the policies. And so, that is how we are possibly going to ever achieve gender equity. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much. We also have Tanushree Shahadas-Gupta here who would like to say a couple things. Tanushree?
I hope you can see me and hear me. So first of all, I'm actually listening and enjoying this interesting discussion. So my take on this in general is that you need to change the mindset. If you don't change the mindset of the people, whatever policies you have and whatever the government is trying to do from top is not going to work. I mean, I have very often faced this situation where people have said I have achieved something because I'm a woman, and some special treatment is done for the woman. And certainly I would not like to have this comments to be taken that I have achieved something because some special treatment has been made to us. So that just tells you need to change the mindset of the people. Otherwise, we will be also blamed that something special is done to some special community and we belong to that special community. We don't want a special treatment, rather we want an equal treatment. And that has to come from the change mindset of the people. Otherwise, I think it will be very difficult to change the scenario that we are fighting for, that's equity. That's not a special treatment. That would be my take.
Thank you, Tanushree. Jyoti, do you have something to add?
I think this was a wonderful discussion, and I'm glad that we all ended on a very positive note, because I think these small steps that we take would add up, and we've come a long way, and that's the hope that we can all make effort. And with that, I think we would like to conclude, right? And thank you, panelists, once again for such a wonderful discussion, and the audience for all your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so Vandana, would you just close up? Give up the...
Yes, so thank you all. The special thanks to panelists and the audience, both from Zoom and YouTube. And special thanks to Nishita and Jyoti for wonderfully conducting this session and keeping to time and getting all the thoughts together. You all will agree with me that this has provided much food for thought, and we definitely will help us to go further to the next day. So just before we conclude, remind you that the program will remain available on YouTube. So please circulate the links to your friends and interested people so that more people can avail, and people can write back the suggestions to us. I'll put that comment in the YouTube also. We'll also bring out a report which will be published in the IPA Bulletin, Physics News. And a reminder for tomorrow's session, we have exciting 2 talks by Professor Shobna Narasimhan and Professor Eva Silverstein. So see you all tomorrow at 7:45 p.m. Indian Standard Time and early morning hours in USA. So join the same Zoom room after the break. Same link will work. So until then, good day and good night to Indian friends. Bye. Thank you very much.